Rajiv Malhotra was a man who carried power in his walk and wealth in his smile. Born in India but settled in America, he had built an empire of companies spread across real estate, technology, and investments. People often whispered his name in business circles, sometimes with respect, sometimes with envy. Wherever he went, eyes followed him, not only because of his billions but because he had that rare aura of command, as if the world itself bent a little around him. He lived in a penthouse apartment that stood above the clouds of New York City. The windows stretched from the floor to the ceiling, giving a view of endless towers and a skyline that glittered like diamonds at night. The furniture inside was expensive, the kind that looked simple but was worth more than most people earned in a year. His days began early, with meetings, calls, and carefully planned schedules that his assistant managed with quiet precision. His assistant, Vikram, was a young man in his late 20s, eager to prove himself useful. He had come from Delhi, bright-eyed, hard-working, and willing to stay by Rajiv's side day and night. For Vikram, working under such a man was a dream come true. He often said yes before thinking, because he didn't want to miss a chance. Rajiv, on the other hand, trusted Vikram but did not always show warmth. For him, business was a battlefield, and kindness was often seen as weakness. Still, there were moments when he lowered his guard, especially when speaking in his mother tongue, Hindi. Whenever they wanted to discuss something private, or when Rajiv wished to express himself freely, they would switch to Hindi, confident that no one else around would understand. The penthouse was always busy with activity. Staff came in and out, cooks preparing meals, drivers waiting downstairs, and cleaners moving quietly with their tools. Among them was a young woman named Amina. She was only 22, but life had already made her stronger than many her age. She worked as a part-time cleaner, balancing it with her studies at a nearby community college. Her dream was to earn a degree in education and one day work with children, helping them build brighter futures. To Rajiv and his assistant, Amina was almost invisible. She wore a simple uniform, kept her hair tied back, and spoke little while working. She swept floors, dusted tables, and wiped windows in silence. She was careful not to disturb conversations, moving softly like a shadow in the background. Most people in the penthouse hardly noticed her, except to give short instructions or polite nods. But Amina noticed everything. She was observant by nature, and while cleaning she often listened to the tone of voices, the sound of laughter, or the weight of silence in the air. People believed cleaners were only there to do chores, yet they were the ones who often witnessed the truest moments, because others forgot they were even present. Rajiv was a man who switched between two worlds. When speaking in English, his tone was polished, diplomatic, and full of charm. He knew the right words to say in front of investors, journalists, and partners. But when he turned to Vikram and spoke in Hindi, his voice changed. It became more relaxed, sometimes sharp, sometimes emotional. It was the language of his heart, the one he had grown up with. One evening, the penthouse was quieter than usual. Amina was cleaning the glass table in the living room, polishing it until it shone. Behind her, Rajiv and Vikram stood near the large window, looking down at the busy city. Rajiv had just returned from an important charity gala. To the world outside, he had smiled warmly, shaken hands with famous people, and spoken about generosity. But now, as the city lights flickered beneath him, he let his true thoughts slip out in Hindi. Sab natakdha, Rajiv muttered to Vikram, his voice low. All of it was just a show. They smile in front of cameras, but behind the scenes, they only care about themselves. Vikram chuckled nervously, unsure if he should agree too strongly. Yes, sir. But people admire you for attending. They think you care. Rajiv shook his head, sipping from a glass of water. Let them think what they want. The truth is, in this world, image is more valuable than honesty. That is the game we all play. Amina's hand slowed for a moment as she listened. She understood every word. Her face showed no reaction, but her heart felt heavy. She had seen him on television before, admired by many. Now she was hearing a side of him that no one else outside this room would know. The conversation continued, Rajiv mixing sharp truths with casual remarks. He even joked in Hindi about how the cleaning staff worked so quietly that they were practically invisible. He didn't say it cruelly, more as an observation, but the words stung Amina a little. She kept her face calm, but inside she thought, we are not invisible. We are people too. Rajiv spoke freely because he believed only Vikram could understand him. That gave him comfort, a sense of privacy in a world where cameras and ears seemed to follow him everywhere. He had no idea that the young woman polishing the glass behind him had once lived in India, that her childhood had been shaped by streets where Hindi filled the air. For Amina, memories came back in fragments: her mother teaching at a small school, the neighborhood children running around, the sounds of Bollywood songs playing in the background. She had left India years ago, but the language had stayed with her like a hidden treasure. No one here in New York knew that she carried it within her. As she worked, she thought about how strange life was. Here she was, cleaning the apartment of a billionaire who thought his words were private, while she, a student working part-time to pay bills, was quietly unlocking truths about him. She realized that wealth could buy many things: luxury homes, glittering parties, respect from strangers, but it could not buy true privacy. That evening ended like many others. Rajiv and Vikram finished their talk, and Amina quietly moved to another room, carrying with her the weight of everything she had just heard. She didn't plan to tell anyone. She didn't even know why she cared so much. But something inside her whispered that her knowledge would one day matter. Rajiv, meanwhile, went to his private office, completely unaware. He thought he had spoken freely, safe in the language of his homeland. He did not look back at the young cleaner, nor did he imagine she had understood. For him, she was simply part of the background, necessary but unnoticed. Yet in truth, that quiet figure had become a silent witness to his unguarded world. She now held secrets he never intended to share, secrets that would eventually lead to an unexpected connection between two very different lives. The next few weeks passed in the same rhythm. Rajiv's penthouse remained a hub of endless activity, where business calls filled the air and important visitors walked in and out. To the people outside, Rajiv was the picture of elegance and control. But inside, in the quiet comfort of his home, he often let down the mask he wore in public. Amina continued her work as usual. She came every evening, often at the time when Rajiv returned from his meetings or dinners. She swept the floors, polished the furniture, and organized little details that no one else noticed. Her movements were steady, and her silence made her almost blend into the background. But every evening, as Rajiv spoke to Vikram in Hindi, her ears caught words that no one else in the room could understand. It became a strange pattern. Rajiv would walk in, loosen his tie, and speak with ease to his assistant, switching from polished English into natural Hindi. Vikram always listened carefully, nodding and writing down notes when needed. Their talks were sometimes about numbers, sometimes about people, and often about the feelings Rajiv never showed to the world. One night, Rajiv came back later than usual. The city outside was already glowing with the lights of thousands of windows, and the streets below looked like golden rivers of cars. Rajiv entered with a tired face, followed by Vikram carrying files. Amina was cleaning the corner of the living room, her back slightly turned as she dusted the shelves. Rajiv sighed as he threw his jacket onto the couch. Kitna drama thaaj ki meeting main, he muttered in Hindi, shaking his head. So much drama in today's meeting. They pretend to be smart, but half of them don't even understand the deal properly. Vikram, who was carrying a folder of documents, quickly placed it on the table. Yes, sir. But at least they agreed to your terms in the end. Rajiv let out a dry laugh. Agreed. They had no choice. Money speaks louder than anything. That's the only language most of them know. Amina's hand slowed as she moved the cloth across the shelf. She kept her eyes fixed on the wood, but her mind absorbed every word. She had always imagined billionaires as people who lived in a world far above ordinary struggles, but listening to Rajiv, she realized that his world too was full of games, tricks, and frustrations. Rajiv walked toward the window, staring at the city lights. His tone softened as he switched topics. You know, Vikram, sometimes I wonder why I even do this. Day and night, running after deals, building more and more. For what? The world claps for a moment and then forgets. Vikram looked surprised at his employer's words but quickly adjusted his expression. Sir, you've built something that no one else could. People respect you. You've created opportunities for thousands. Rajiv shook his head slowly. Respect is temporary. Today they cheer, tomorrow they criticize. That's the truth. Amina's chest tightened as she listened. There was something strangely human in his words, something vulnerable. He wasn't just the proud man she had seen on television. Behind his strong image was a person questioning his own choices. The conversation shifted again, this time to lighter things. Rajiv spoke about the gala he had attended, about the famous faces and the artificial smiles. He made a sharp remark in Hindi about how people clapped for causes they didn't even believe in. Vikram laughed politely, though his eyes showed nervousness. Rajiv then lowered his voice and pointed to the corner where the cleaners usually worked. Dekho, in Lagan Ko. They are like shadows. Always there, but nobody notices. That's how life works. Some shine, others remain unseen. The words felt like a knife to Amina's heart. She knew he had not meant to insult directly, but the thought of being called a shadow hurt deeply. She kept her face calm, her hands moving, but inside her mind screamed, I am not invisible. I understand you. I hear everything you say. What Rajiv didn't know was that every word he spoke in Hindi was weaving a secret bond with the young woman he ignored. His assistant believed only he could understand him, but Amina was silently storing away his thoughts like precious fragments. There was another evening when Rajiv spoke more personally than ever before. He sat on the sofa, tired, with his shoes still on, and said softly in Hindi, Kab hai mujhe apni bachpan ki yaad aati hai. Sometimes I miss my childhood. Those small lanes, the smell of street food, the sound of festivals. Everything was simple then. No contracts, no pressure, no endless expectations. Vikram, sitting across from him, smiled carefully. You've come far, sir. From those small lanes to this penthouse in New York. It's inspiring. Rajiv's lips curved into a faint smile. Yes, inspiring. But also lonely. Success is not as sweet when you cannot share the real truth of your heart with anyone. Amina felt her breath catch. His words touched her unexpectedly. She too often felt lonely in the city, working quietly, carrying her own dreams, with nobody to share them with. For a moment, she felt as if she and the billionaire were standing on two sides of the same invisible wall, different worlds, yet both longing for someone to truly understand them. Day after day, the pattern repeated. Rajiv revealed more of himself in Hindi, confident that no one outside his assistant could ever grasp the meaning. He laughed, he complained, he judged, and sometimes, he confessed things he would never say in English. Amina absorbed it all. She did not know why she kept listening so closely. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was because she had once admired him from afar, and now she was discovering the man behind the curtain. Or maybe it was because, in his words, she heard a reflection of her own struggles, the desire to be seen, the search for meaning, the fear of being misunderstood. One evening, something happened that made her heart race. Rajiv was discussing an upcoming deal, and he used a Hindi phrase that Vikram clearly misunderstood. Vikram repeated it incorrectly, mixing up the words. Rajiv corrected him impatiently, but Amina, without meaning to, whispered under her breath the correct phrase in perfect Hindi. Her voice was so soft that even she barely heard it. She quickly covered her mistake by coughing and turning back to her work. Luckily, neither Rajiv nor Vikram noticed. But her heart pounded in her chest. She realized how close she had come to revealing her secret. After that night, she became more careful, making sure her face gave nothing away, even when Rajiv said things that touched her or made her want to laugh. She stayed hidden in her silence, her knowledge locked inside. Yet inside her grew a strange feeling. She wasn't just a cleaner anymore. She was a silent witness to the unguarded world of a man who thought he was unseen. Every evening, as she left the penthouse and stepped out into the cool New York night, she carried with her pieces of his truths that no one else knew. And though Rajiv believed she was invisible, the reality was that Amina saw him more clearly than most people ever would. Amina's days began early, long before the sun climbed over the tall New York buildings. She would pack her books into her worn backpack, attend her classes at the community college, and then head to her part-time cleaning job at the penthouse. Her life was a balance between dreams and responsibilities, and though she often felt tired, she refused to give up. Most people she met only saw the surface, a young woman pushing a mop, scrubbing windows, or carrying cleaning supplies. They didn't know that behind her quiet eyes was a mind full of memories, ideas, and determination. And they certainly didn't know she carried a hidden skill, a language that connected her to a past far from America. Amina had spent part of her childhood in India. Her mother, a teacher, had taken her there when she was little, hoping for better opportunities. They lived in a modest neighborhood where the streets were alive with voices, music, and the smell of food from small shops. Children ran barefoot, shouting and laughing in Hindi, and Amina joined them, picking up the language quickly. For her, it became more than just words, it was the rhythm of her childhood, the sound of warmth and belonging. Even after they moved back, the language stayed with her. She kept reading small books, watching movies, and speaking to herself sometimes in Hindi, so she wouldn't forget. It was like carrying a piece of her childhood in her heart. No one in New York knew the secret, not even her closest friends at college. So when she began working at Rajiv's penthouse and heard him switch to Hindi, she felt both startled and comforted. It was like hearing an old song after many years. But what surprised her most was not the language, it was the things he said when he thought no one else could understand. Rajiv, the billionaire admired by the world, spoke with such honesty in Hindi that it made him almost a different person. He revealed frustrations about fake smiles at parties, worries about his business rivals, and even moments of loneliness. He trusted Vikram to listen, never imagining that the young woman sweeping in the corner could understand every word. At first, Amina listened with curiosity. It was almost like watching a movie where a powerful character shows his hidden side. But slowly, she began to feel more connected. His words reminded her that even those at the top carried doubts and burdens. Sometimes, when he spoke of missing his childhood in India, she felt her own memories stir. She too missed the simple days of her past, before responsibilities grew heavy. There was one evening that stayed in her mind. Rajiv had just returned from a heated meeting. His face was hard, his tie loosely hanging around his neck. He spoke to Vikram in a sharp tone, complaining about how competitors were trying to block his deal. Sab apna fayda dekht hain, he said bitterly. Everyone only thinks of their own benefit. No one cares about loyalty anymore. Amina, wiping the edge of a table, felt the weight of those words. She had seen the same truth in her own small world. People pretending to be friends but disappearing when help was needed. His words, though about business, carried a universal pain. On another evening, Rajiv sat back on the sofa and confessed in Hindi, Kab hai lagta hai, main kitna akale hoon. Sometimes I feel so alone, even in a room full of people. His assistant said nothing for a moment, perhaps unsure how to respond. But Amina, standing nearby with her cleaning cloth, felt her throat tighten. She knew that loneliness too well, the kind where you are surrounded by people yet feel unseen. The more she listened, the more she realized that Rajiv was not just a billionaire living in a glass tower. He was a man who carried invisible burdens, who used Hindi not only as a secret code but also as a release, a way to unchain the words he couldn't risk saying in English. And yet, he never looked at her. To him, she was just part of the background, a figure moving silently with a broom or cloth. He had no idea that the girl he believed to be invisible was, in fact, the only other person in the room who fully understood him. Amina often wondered what would happen if she revealed her secret. What if one day she replied to him in Hindi? Would he be angry? Embarrassed? Shocked? The thought both excited and frightened her. She imagined his face when he realized that every comment, every private word, had been understood by someone he had overlooked. But then fear stopped her. She couldn't risk losing her job. This work helped her pay for her studies, and without it, her dream of becoming a teacher would fade. So she kept her knowledge locked inside, pretending to be deaf to the language that filled the air. Still, her heart refused to remain untouched. Rajiv's words stayed with her even after she left the penthouse each night. On the subway ride home, she would replay them in her mind, thinking about what he said and how it connected to her own struggles. It was as if his voice had become part of her journey, even though he didn't know it. There were also moments that stung. Once, Rajiv remarked casually in Hindi that the staff working around him were like furniture, always there, silent, unnoticed. Amina had to swallow her feelings and keep working, though inside she wanted to scream, "We are not furniture. We are people, with dreams, with thoughts, with stories." She wondered if he truly believed that, or if it was just one of those careless comments spoken without thought. But alongside the sharp remarks, there were times when his humanity shone. He spoke about his mother, how she used to tell him stories at night. He spoke about missing the festivals in India, the lights of Diwali, the sound of drums during Holi. When Amina heard those words, she felt an ache in her heart, remembering her own mother and the festivals they had once shared. In those moments, she no longer felt like a cleaner and he no longer felt like a billionaire. They were simply two people tied to memories of the same land. The hidden listening became a secret part of her life. It was almost like carrying a diary of his unspoken truths, written not on paper but in her memory. She told no one about it. Not her classmates, not her mother, not even herself out loud. But inside, she knew the secret would one day change something between them. The turning point came unexpectedly. One late evening, Rajiv was teaching Vikram how to phrase something in Hindi for a speech he wanted to give to an Indian audience. Vikram struggled with the sentence, fumbling with the grammar. Rajiv grew impatient, repeating the phrase. Amina, without realizing, whispered the correct form softly under her breath. The sound slipped into the air like a drop of water in silence. Her eyes widened as soon as the words left her lips. She quickly bent lower, pretending to scrub the floor, praying they hadn't noticed. Vikram was too busy looking embarrassed about his own mistake. Rajiv, caught in his frustration, didn't turn. Amina let out a breath of relief, her heart pounding like a drum. That night, as she walked home under the dim streetlights, she couldn't stop thinking about how close she had come to revealing her secret. She felt a mix of fear and excitement. A part of her wanted the truth to come out, to step out of invisibility. Another part warned her to stay silent, to protect her fragile world. But one thing was clear, her life was no longer the same as before. She was not just a cleaner anymore. She was a listener, a witness, a keeper of hidden words. And though Rajiv still believed she was invisible, the reality was different. She saw him more clearly than anyone else in his world, and she carried a truth that could change both their lives if ever revealed. The day that changed everything started like any other. The sky outside was painted with soft shades of orange as the sun set over New York, and the city below Rajiv's penthouse was buzzing with life. Cars honked, lights flickered, and people rushed home after long hours of work. Inside the tall glass building, however, a different rhythm played out, a rhythm of silence, polished floors, and the quiet hum of success. Rajiv had returned from an important meeting. He walked into the penthouse with his usual air of authority, his assistant Vikram following closely behind with files stacked in his hands. Amina was already there, wiping down the polished wooden shelves near the living room. She kept her head slightly bowed, as always, careful not to draw attention to herself. Rajiv loosened his tie and sat down on the wide leather sofa, looking tired but restless. His eyes carried the weight of thoughts he couldn't share in public. Vikram carefully placed the documents on the glass table and sat across from him, waiting for instructions. For a few moments, there was silence. Then Rajiv began speaking in Hindi, his words heavy with frustration. Ye dil utna asan nahin hoga jitna lag raha tha. These people smile to your face, but behind closed doors, they're planning 10 different tricks. Vikram nodded quickly, writing down notes as Rajiv spoke. We should prepare stronger terms then, sir. Maybe add a clause. Rajiv interrupted him, shaking his head. No, they'll resist that. We need to make them feel they're winning, even when they're not. His voice grew softer, more thoughtful. Business is nothing but illusion, Vikram. If they believe they're on top, you've already won. Amina's hand slowed as she dusted, the soft cloth moving in circles on the shelf. She listened, her heart steady, her face calm. She had grown used to these conversations, the way Rajiv's voice shifted between sharpness and weariness. She had heard him speak truths that no one else would ever know. And she still carried her secret, tucked deep inside, that she understood every word. That evening, however, something unexpected happened. Rajiv picked up a sheet of paper from the stack. It contained notes for an upcoming speech he wanted to give to an Indian community group in the city. He began reading it aloud in Hindi, practicing the tone, but paused halfway, frowning. Vikram, ye line galat lag rahi hai. Read it back. Vikram hesitated, then read the line, but he stumbled badly. His accent twisted the words, and he mixed up 2 of them. Rajiv groaned in frustration, rubbing his forehead. No, no, that's completely wrong. Haven't I told you before? Pronunciation matters. If you say it like that, they'll laugh. Vikram looked nervous, flipping through the pages, trying to get it right. But the more he tried, the worse it sounded. Rajiv leaned back with irritation, closing his eyes for a moment. And then, it happened. Without realizing it, Amina softly whispered the correct sentence under her breath as she wiped the last corner of the shelf. The words came out perfectly, smooth and natural, the way a native speaker would say them. She hadn't meant for anyone to hear. It was almost like a reflex, her heart speaking before her mind could stop it. But the room went silent. Rajiv's eyes snapped open. Vikram froze with the papers in his hand. Slowly, both men turned toward the young woman standing in the corner. Amina froze too, the cloth still in her hand, her back half turned. She wished she could disappear, wished the floor would open and swallow her. Rajiv's voice broke the silence. Tum hi Hindi aati hai. His words were slow, filled with disbelief. You know Hindi? Amina's breath caught. Her secret was no longer a secret. For a moment she thought of denying it, of pretending she hadn't said anything. But the truth was out, and the look on Rajiv's face made it impossible to lie. She turned slowly, her hands trembling, and nodded softly. Yes, sir. I understand. The silence grew heavier. Vikram's eyes widened, his expression a mix of shock and confusion. Rajiv leaned forward, staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. The invisible cleaner, the shadow in the background, had suddenly stepped into the light. For a long moment, no one spoke. Rajiv's mind raced, remembering every word he had ever said in her presence, every sharp remark, every private confession, every moment of vulnerability. And she had heard it all. His face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and curiosity. Finally, he let out a breath and asked, "For how long?" Amina swallowed hard, her voice small but steady. "From the beginning, sir. I I grew up in India for some years. I learned the language there." Rajiv blinked, stunned. He leaned back on the sofa, his hand resting on his chin as he processed the truth. For years he had believed Hindi was his shield in this foreign land, a safe language he could use without fear of being understood. Now, that shield had broken, and the one who had broken it was the young woman he had barely noticed. Vikram shifted uncomfortably in his seat, unsure of what to say. He glanced at Rajiv, then at Amina, then back again, as if waiting for instructions. Rajiv finally spoke, his tone softer than before. "All this time, you understood everything?" Amina nodded. She wanted to apologize, to explain that she never meant to invade his privacy. But her lips wouldn't form the words. She simply stood there, her hands clutching the cloth tightly. Instead of anger, something else appeared in Rajiv's eyes: curiosity. He studied her carefully, noticing details he had ignored before, the quiet determination in her face, the intelligence in her eyes, the way she stood with dignity despite her fear. For the first time, she was not invisible. After what felt like forever, Rajiv spoke again, this time in English, as if to mark the change. "What is your name?" "Amina," she replied softly. He nodded slowly. "Amina," he repeated it, as though tasting the word for the first time. Then he let out a small, unexpected laugh. "So all this time, you've been listening to me, haven't you?" Her cheeks warmed with embarrassment. She looked down, ashamed. "I never wanted to, sir. I couldn't help it. I was working, and the words. I understood them." Rajiv's laughter faded, replaced by something deeper. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, and said quietly, "Then you know me better than most people in the city." Vikram looked startled by his boss's words, but Rajiv didn't look at him. His eyes stayed fixed on Amina. The air in the room had shifted completely. Amina was no longer a shadow. She was no longer invisible. She was someone who carried pieces of his truth, someone who had seen behind the mask without him even knowing. And Rajiv, a man who rarely allowed himself to be vulnerable, suddenly felt strangely exposed but also strangely relieved. For the rest of the evening, the conversation was not the same. Rajiv didn't continue practicing his speech. Instead, he kept stealing glances at Amina, his mind filled with questions. Who was she, really? What kind of life had she lived? And how had he failed to notice her until now? Amina finished her cleaning quietly, her heart still pounding. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring. Would he fire her? Would he ignore her? Or would this be the beginning of something different? She didn't know. All she knew was that the wall between them had been broken, and nothing could be the same again. That night, when she left the penthouse and stepped into the cool air of the city, her mind was spinning. She had carried a secret for so long, and now it was no longer hers alone. The billionaire she thought would never see her now looked at her differently. And for Rajiv, as he sat alone in the silence of his penthouse, one thought echoed in his mind: the quiet girl cleaning in the background was not invisible. She had always been there, listening, understanding, holding pieces of his unguarded world. And he realized, perhaps for the first time, that respect was not only about power, but about seeing those who are unseen. The days after Amina's secret came out were unlike anything she had known before. Every time she entered the penthouse now, she could feel the change in the air. The silence that once surrounded her work had shifted into something heavier, something watchful. Rajiv's eyes, which once slid past her as if she were part of the furniture, now seemed to linger. He noticed her presence, and that alone made her nervous. At first, she feared the worst. She thought he might fire her, thinking she had betrayed his privacy. She worried he would call her out in anger, demand to know why she hadn't told him earlier, or accuse her of eavesdropping. Each night, as she tied her uniform and entered the penthouse, her heart thudded with unease. But surprisingly, none of those things happened. Rajiv did not fire her. He did not scold her. Instead, he treated her with a strange curiosity. Sometimes, while speaking with Vikram, his eyes would flick toward her, as if testing whether she was listening. Other times, when he switched to Hindi, he would glance at her face, as though reminding himself that she understood. It was unnerving for Amina, but slowly, something else began to bloom, an unexpected kind of respect. Rajiv, who had once dismissed the cleaning staff as shadows, now saw her as a person with a hidden world of her own. One evening, as she polished the glass table in the living room, Rajiv spoke directly to her for the first time in Hindi. His voice was calm, almost curious. "Tum kab hai batiyakin nahin?" he asked. "Why did you never tell me?" Amina froze for a moment, her cloth still against the glass. Then she turned, her voice steady but soft. "Because, sir, it was not important. I was here to do my work, not to listen. I never wanted to break your trust." Rajiv studied her, his sharp eyes softer than usual. "But you did listen," he said. She lowered her gaze, ashamed. "I couldn't help it. When you speak in a language I know, the words come to me. I did not want to, but I understood." Rajiv leaned back on the sofa, folding his hands together. Instead of anger, there was a faint smile on his face. "Perhaps it was good. Perhaps I needed someone to hear me without pretending. Do you know how rare that is?" The words surprised her. She hadn't expected him to admit something so honest. For a man who had everything, it seemed strange that he would value being heard. But Amina realized that wealth could buy many things: silence, comfort, luxury, but not the simple gift of being understood. From that evening onward, their dynamic shifted. Rajiv began to speak to her more often, not as a boss to an employee, but as a man curious about another human being. He asked her about her studies, about her family, about the years she had spent in India. At first, Amina answered cautiously, unsure how much to share. But the more he asked, the more she opened up. She told him about her mother, a strong woman who worked tirelessly to give her daughter a chance at education. She told him about her childhood in India, how she had played on dusty streets, eaten sweets from corner shops, and joined in the colorful festivals. She told him how she had struggled in New York, juggling classes and jobs, sometimes skipping meals to save money for books. Rajiv listened quietly, his usual impatience replaced by genuine interest. He had spent years surrounded by people who spoke to him only about profits, deals, and opportunities. Rarely did anyone speak to him about life in such simple, honest words. And as he listened, he felt something stir within him, a respect for this young woman who had fought her way through challenges without complaint. There was one night when Rajiv confessed something he had never said out loud. He was sitting by the window, looking out at the glittering city lights, when he spoke in a low voice. "People think I am powerful because of money. But the truth is, money has made me lonely. Everyone around me wants something. They smile, but behind their smile is a request, a deal, a favor, a connection. No one talks to me just as a person." Amina, standing nearby with her cleaning supplies, looked at him quietly. For the first time, she felt his words not as a billionaire's complaint, but as a human truth. She spoke gently. Maybe you don't need everyone. Maybe you only need a few people who see you as you are. Rajiv turned toward her, his expression thoughtful. It was strange to him, receiving advice from someone he had once overlooked. But her words carried weight because they came from honesty, not ambition. In the days that followed, a bond formed between them. It was not friendship in the ordinary sense, and certainly not equality after all, he was still the billionaire and she the cleaner. But there was understanding, a connection that grew each time they exchanged words. Rajiv began to greet her when she entered, something he had never done before. Sometimes, he would ask her opinion on small things, even on a line in his Hindi speeches, just to hear her voice. For Amina, it was both surprising and humbling. She had never imagined that her hidden knowledge of Hindi would lead to this. She still did her work with the same dedication, polishing, sweeping, and dusting. But now she carried herself differently, no longer invisible. Vikram, however, was unsettled by the change. He couldn't understand why his powerful boss was suddenly speaking to a cleaner as if her words mattered. He watched with quiet unease, but he dared not question Rajiv. The story did not end with grand gestures or dramatic turns. There were no sudden promises of riches or miracles. Instead, it ended with something far more meaningful: mutual respect. One evening, as Amina finished her work and prepared to leave, Rajiv stopped her at the door. He looked at her seriously and said, "Amina, thank you." She blinked, unsure why he was thanking her. "For what, sir?" He smiled faintly. "For listening. For seeing me when I thought no one could." Her eyes softened. She nodded gently. "And thank you, sir, for seeing me now." With that, she left the penthouse, stepping into the cool night air. The city lights sparkled around her, and for the first time, she felt lighter. She had not only carried his hidden words but had given him something back, a reminder that respect and humanity were greater than wealth. Rajiv watched her leave, his thoughts quiet but deep. He realized that the greatest lesson he had learned did not come from a boardroom, a contract, or a bank balance. It came from a young woman with a quiet presence, who had been invisible until the moment she chose to speak. And so their lives continued, in different worlds but forever touched by that unexpected discovery that no one is truly invisible, and sometimes the most powerful connections come from the most unexpected places.